Welcome to A Shock in the Dark, an audio journal of a haunting. This is episode 2.
Okay. Today is April 6th, Tuesday, April 6th. It is 10:06 p.m. And where did we leave off? I think on my last recording, I told you about, my childhood, told you about how every single night my bedroom was overrun with shadow people. And then the horseman, the white silhouette man on a white silhouette horse that would, come down the hallway and turn around and go back over and over again. And basically, every night, that was the sequence of events, and it would basically occur the exact same way, Maybe small things could change, the amount of shadow people in the room, all that kind of stuff. But then one night, there was a huge change. One pretty crazy, extraordinary night. And that's what I'm going to tell you about in this recording. So, one night, as I was waiting around for all the terror to begin, our two dogs, who were named Dawn and Blizzard, who were both albino collies, oddly enough, they started barking like crazy. This is, the middle of the night. Everybody had already gone to bed. And the reason I noticed the dogs barking so much is because it was extremely unusual for these dogs to bark, because not only were they albino, both dogs had been born with multiple birth defects, and both of them were 100% deaf. And because of that, these dogs that we owned since, they were newborn pups, had only barked a couple of times in their entire lives. Now, both dogs were going completely nuts. At night, we kept the dogs in these two dog pens we built for them near the woods. So, it's these two fenced-off areas about 20 yards or so from my bedroom window. So if I went to my bedroom window, I could easily see out there and see the dogs, and that's what I did. The dogs are freaking out like never before, and so we had those little window shades with the slats, and I made one of the little cracks in the slats a little bit bigger and looked out there, and I can still remember exactly what that scene looked like and felt like. This scene and this night is burned into my memory. I mean, it's like a high fidelity memory where I can remember every detail of everything. And, there's not very many memories I have in my life that are so detailed and so, vibrant in my mind. But it was a clear night. It was a full moon, or at least, almost full moon. It was enough of a full moon so that I could see the dogs very well. Plus, they were white. That made it easier. There was a fairly high gusting wind, and I distinctly remember the sound of the dead leaves rattling as they, tumbled across the yard, blown by the wind. And as the leaves would, blow around on the trees and fall. So my guess was the dead of winter, but we're talking about the Gulf Coast. We're talking about the South of the United States, so it wasn't cold or anything. But I remember seeing both of these dogs just running back and forth in their individual pens, and like I said, just barking like crazy at something in the woods. Neither one of them would take their eyes off the forest. So I'm watching the dogs go nuts outside the window when all of a sudden 2 things happened at once. First, my brother, my older brother, who was in the other bed in our room, jolted up so hard it scared me to death. It was like, somebody had just used a defibrillator on him or something. He just, boom, shot up. He shot straight up out of sleeping position and sat up rigidly in the bed. And at the exact same time, both dogs simultaneously stopped barking. It looked like it was choreographed. It was so... I can't even begin to describe to you, but both dogs moved exactly together simultaneously. It was like one rapid but smooth motion. They both turned their heads, turned their bodies, and sat and looked right at me in the window. I was just poking, just had this little tiny crack in the window that I could see out of, but both dogs were just staring at me, and I know they couldn't actually see anything in the window. The shades were basically closed, but to me, it was like they could sense what was happening inside the house with my brother. That's the way I felt about it. So 2 seconds after my brother shot up in bed and the dogs whipped around to stare in my direction, boom! My brother immediately assumed some kind of yoga-looking position or something where... Okay, he was on his knees, leaning way back so that his back was arched, his arms completely straight, and, heading back behind him, reaching back with his hands, grasping his ankles. So he's on his knees, leaning back, his arms are to his back, his hands are grabbing his ankles, and then, boom, he got into another position, just suddenly, that looked like a meditation kind of position. Look, I don't know a lot about this stuff or anything, but this is just what it looked like to me, okay? I'm trying to describe it as best I can. So this next position he got into suddenly was his legs were crossed in what we used to call Indian style, which I'm, sure is not right, but that's what we called it when we were kids. But his arms were straight up in the air with each hand flat against the other hand. If you could imagine that, you put your arms in the air, your palms of your hands together. Now his eyes were wide open, but they were mostly rolled back in his head. I could see the white parts of his eyes, and they were like jittering around in his head. I wouldn't have been able to see anything, but, thanks to the bright moonlight, that came through the shade, I saw all this happening. So there he is, arms in the air. Then he slowly separated his arms and brought them down so his elbows were bent and his hands were palms up in front of him. It's like if you imagine how you would carry a tray of food with your the tray sitting on the palms of your hands. And then his middle finger on each hand slowly curved in to meet the thumb, like somebody who didn't know how to make an OK sign, or they make the OK sign with, their middle finger and their thumb instead of their pointy finger. Palms still facing up. And all this was, obviously very odd, but especially since my brother never did anything like sleepwalk or talk in his sleep. But we're just getting started here, because what happened next was one of the most startling and frightening things I've ever seen in my life. I was oh my God, I can't even begin to describe how frightened I was. It's still one of the most haunting and mysterious and burned into my brain vivid memories I have from my childhood. My brother, who was 4 years older than me, so 10, 11 years old, cleared his throat and he started speaking. Now, my brother wasn't the most outgoing person in the world or anything. He was a little shy, a little timid, but that night when he cleared his throat, it sounded like an important person, like a world leader or something, at a fancy party or in front of the UN or something, was signaling for everybody to shut up because he was about to say something important. And he certainly did say something. My brother, not even a teenager yet, but the voice that came out of him seriously sounded like a grown man. And not just a grown man, but a very serious grown man. Somebody with authority, somebody with a commanding message to get out. And I don't know how to explain this next part, because I was young and I didn't have much exposure to different cultures at all, different languages or anything. In any case, as odd as it sounds, from the very first word he spoke, I recognized it immediately as being Latin. I just knew it was Latin. I knew in my heart it was Latin. I just, no question about it. Now, later on, my dad would say it sounded like fluid, formal Native American, which he was familiar with. And I think he said Choctaw. I think he said it sounded like a Choctaw language. But my mom would have sworn that it was Egyptian. But I really don't know what language it was, if any, and I certainly can't remember any words he spoke. But to me, it sounded like the language I had heard in my cousin's church when I would stay with them some weekends. They were Catholic, and the priest would speak in Latin from time to time, and I thought it was Latin, not only because it reminded me of the way the priest sounded at my cousin's church, but I don't know, it just flashed into my head, that's Latin. I can't explain it. But so there's my brother, basically in what appears to me to be a trance, sitting in some kind of Buddha stance with the voice of a foreign grown man speaking an ancient language. And it was quite a speech. It had inflection and emotion, and it was commanding. It sounded powerful. My brother continued talking long enough to wake up my parents, and my mom and dad came running into the room because they thought a man had broken into the house and was in our room. They heard a man's voice coming out of our room. They were certainly shocked to see it was my brother sitting there in that position, speaking those ominous sounding words. My parents just, I think they were shocked for a couple of seconds. But then my dad, who, by the way, was in his very loose-fitting, tighty-whitey underwear and carrying his pistol, flicked on the lights. And the second, the fraction of a second, when that light went on, my brother immediately collapsed down to the bed, still asleep. If he was sleepwalking or sleep-talking, he had never done that before, and he's never done it since. Very odd. My parents were confused by all this, but it was late and there was really nothing more they could do, so Mom chalked it up to him talking in his sleep. And she kissed us both on our foreheads, turned off the lights. Mom and Dad went back to bed. And, you know, maybe it was a few minutes, but it felt like it was instant. The room suddenly got really cold. And like I said, I'm sure it was winter, but again, this was in the South. This was on the Gulf Coast, and, you know, it barely got down to the 60s in the winter time. And, you know, if our room wasn't crazy hot, it was always at least warm. We didn't have any central air conditioning or anything. But suddenly, as soon as my parents got back in bed for a second, it was just freezing in that room, and it didn't just feel cold. It was cold because I could see my breath. So I knew it was super cold. Then, right on cue, just as they did every night before that, here come the black silhouettes looking into their room from in the hall. And if tonight hadn't already been odd enough, tonight was different than any other night as far as everything else that happened as well. So I know I sound like a complete nutter, and maybe I am, but hang on to your hat because it's about to get nuttier here, okay? But all I can do is be honest and tell you what happened. So the silhouette people did not walk out of the wall this night. They stayed inside the wall, but this hole opened up in the wall, like what I would imagine a portal would look like. It wasn't a hole like a physical hole, but like how do I explain it? Like I had X-ray vision or something, and a little semicircular type vision of what was happening in the wall appeared, and I got a glimpse into the world of the shadow people, and you know, a lot of it was obscured by what looked like smoke, fog, something like that, but there were all these silhouette people in there, and they were all running around. It looked like they were preparing for something, like, you know, something big was imminent. Yeah, I would have guessed like they were prepping for a military engagement or something, you know. Every once in a while, the smoke or the fog would have enough of a break in it where I could see that there were hundreds of these shadow people standing side by side, like shoulder to shoulder, in these long rows, basically as far as the eye could see. And the other shadow people were rushing around, picking up stacks of papers, bringing in other stacks, handing out things to these people, checking them. It was like, I don't know, they were preparing for something, is maybe the best way I can describe it. Then, suddenly, almost all at once, they all noticed the portal in the wall. And in quick order, everybody stopped what they were doing. They were all looking at this hole in the wall from inside the wall. And they were looking at me. The vibe here was like when Dorothy saw the man behind the microphone in Oz. You know, Oops, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. I couldn't tell if they were shocked that I could see them, or if they were shocked that there was a hole in the wall and there was a kid behind it. I don't know what was happening there, but either way, that vision, that portal, that hole in the wall suddenly closed up, and then right on schedule. I heard it in the distance and knew immediately what it was. It was the hooves. As usual, the sound grew louder and louder and louder of the horse galloping. But this was way different as well. This time, when the horseman got to the end of the hall, right in front of my door, he did not turn around and gallop off again. This time he stopped. And this white silhouette man got off of the horse. And of course, this had never happened before. Nothing ever changed about these experiences when I was a kid. It was always the same thing over and over again, but this guy got off the horse. And he took this chest-looking thing, or box. Nowadays, I guess I would describe it as like one of those old bank boxes you see in Wild West movies or whatever. But this box, this chest, whatever it was tied to the back of the horse. He untied it, took the box off, and he placed the chest deep into the floor in the hallway. Like, his arms went into the floor as he put the chest in there. He stood up, paused for a second, got back on his horse, and rode away. And after that night, I never saw the horseman or the black silhouette people ever again. Man, it makes me tense even thinking about it. And I could share more details of a few other weird nights. There was a night our goat, who lived in a little, fenced off area outside, went nuts. Everybody was asleep and this goat started screaming. And, I'll chalk this up to a kid's imagination, but at the time, have you ever heard a goat scream? It is chilling. I mean, it is scary. And, as a kid, to me, it sounded like this goat was screaming, "Help." Ah, man, that's just terrifying to even think about. But I heard this goat, and it was screaming, "Help." And I could hear my parents starting to stir around in the room, so I knew they were hearing it too. And then my brother said, "Is that the goat?" And before I could answer, the goat just started screaming this blood-curdling scream. And my mom and dad, they jumped out of bed. Dad, once again, loose-fitting tighty-whities, pistol, ran outside. But the goat stopped. Nothing was wrong with the goat. Everything was fine. I don't know what that was. And another night, about 10 years later, my sister did see the silhouette people too. And later, my mom and dad saw the silhouette people. And I will have to tell you about at least one of those experiences, because to me, it proves this was not just crazy kid imagination. This was... something was happening. But there's something more important I need to talk about, and the whole reason for these recordings and everything, and I want to get to that. It's been many, many, many years since those events occurred, and I was a tiny kid in bed experiencing all this stuff, and now I'm a grown man. I've traveled all over the world. I've lived in 10 different giant cities and experienced so many interesting things in life, and hopefully I've gotten a little bit wiser with age. Well, near the end of last month, March 2021, here in my apartment in Hollywood, California, where I am right now, I was asleep when suddenly something woke me up. I looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. And while I'm not Mr. Ghosty Pants, I do know that 3 a.m. is supposed to hold some sort of significance. Maybe that's the real witching hour or something. But I woke up, looked at the clock, it's 3 a.m., and then it happened. For the first time since I was a tiny kid, I realized I was hearing hooves. And that is the reason I started making these recordings, because either these recordings that I'm making, they're either the diary of a very serious, very real haunting, or this is the diary of somebody going through a complete mental break. There is no other answer. And when I tell you everything that's been happening, I mean, you'll know. I'm either completely losing my mind, or this is some real crazy stuff. Either way, I really wanted to keep track of this, so the details don't get lost. So I'll get into all the stuff that's been happening the next time I'm able to record. I really need to go to bed. I've got to work early tomorrow from home, but still have to get up early for meetings. But I guess we'll talk next time. So I hope I'm able to make another recording soon. Have a good night.
You've been listening to A Shock in the Dark, an audio journal of a haunting. For a free subscription to this series, push the subscribe button. To get an alert when the next episode posts, push the bell notification symbol. Post your questions or comments to the narrator in the comment section below. To contribute your recorded or personal story for this series, send it in an email to aSHOCKintheDARK@gmail.com. Until next time, as our narrator says, good night, whoever you are.